Hey everybody, it's Grandmaster Ben Finegold here for Kid Chess. And this is, my favorite player, Paul Morphy. He has the black pieces. This is, I'd say, one of my 5 favorite games of his. He has the black pieces in a very exciting opening. Do you know the name of this opening? The move F4 is very uncommon now, but in the 1800s, it was a very common move. This is called the King's Gambit. White sacrifices a pawn, and he tries to build a big center. He wants to play d4 in the center, but then black would take it. So he's hoping that black takes this pawn, then he'll play d4 later and get a big center, and hopefully win his pawn back. And usually, white plays very aggressively and tries to attack black, but Morphy turned the tables pretty early. Morphy sacrificed a pawn, a counter gambit, by the move d5. That's actually the move that I played today. And after taking the pawn, he played another surprising move, e4. Now, before we look at this position, let's go back. Not only could white take this pawn, white could also take that pawn, but that's a big mistake. If you take that pawn, black plays queen h4 check. Oh no. And now if g3, queen takes check, wins the rook in the corner. Terrible. So we can't take that pawn. If earlier in the game on move 2, black plays queen check, it doesn't work. I just played g3. But with this f pawn gone, queen takes e4 check is winning. We have to keep our f pawn there. That's why we can't take on e5 like this. Or like a knight. Okay, so d5 takes. And now the reason black plays e4 is to stop knight f3. White can't develop his knight to a good square. White doesn't want to go here. That blocks his bishop. Okay, so white developed his other knight, and black developed his knight, and white played d3. And now black did something excellent, something you should try to do. He not only developed a piece, but he pinned his opponent's piece. Bishop b4. He's pinning the knight to the king. This is called an absolute pin when it's pinned to the king. That means you can't move it. A relative pin is another kind of pin where you could move the piece, but then you would lose something, like a queen or a rook. You don't want to lose a queen or a rook, but you're allowed to. You just don't want to. So if you're allowed to, but you don't want to, that's a relative pin. If you're not allowed to, it's an absolute pin, absolutely forbidden. So he pins the knight can't move, and now he's ready to castle. Now, when you're playing chess, usually white has more pieces out in black in the opening because white goes first. But in this position, because black sacrificed a pawn and he wanted to attack, he has 2 pieces out and white only has 1. That's Paul Morphy for you. Now, white didn't want his knight pinned. He wanted to move his knight. So he unpinned his knight with the move bishop to d2. Now the knight can move. It's not pinned to the king anymore. And Morphy, he wanted that knight pinned, so he sacrificed another pawn, e3. Okay, forcing white to take the pawn. Now white's up 2 pawns, but his knight's pinned again. This pawn's attacked, and the king and the bishop are lined up on the same file. Now Morphy doesn't like to take pawns. Morphy likes to checkmate. So Morphy castled. He wants to play rook e8, and maybe queen e7, and maybe knight g4, and attack that bishop. Okay? And he didn't want to get his bishop attacked, so he moved it back to d2, unpinning his knight again. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop. He could take with the bishop also. Rook e8 check, bishop to e2. These are all very reasonable moves. Now, white's up 2 pawns. That's a lot, but this pawn isn't very safe, and the bishop is pinned. And the king is in the center, and black's king is castled. If you were a grandmaster, you would say that he has compensation. Here's 2 pawns, but I have an attack. Which side do you like? Depends on your style. Morphy's style was to attack. He didn't want to be up a pawn or 2 pawns and have his opponent attack him. He wanted to be the one to attack. Again, Morphy's not interested in pawns. He's interested in your king. So he didn't take this pawn. He played bishop g4. He wants to get at that king. Okay? And white was like, oh boy, You didn't take my pawn. I can defend my pawn. c4. That's a funny pawn structure. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. This might be the first time I've seen this pawn structure. So white's up 2 pawns, but black has a lot of attack. Now, black wants to get his knight out. Doesn't really want to go here. He'd rather go here and then here. That looks better. But he can't go knight c6 because the pawn is here. So he played c6. Okay, now in my opinion, this is where white made the losing move. White made a really bad move here. White shouldn't be so concerned with his pawns. He should be concerned with castling. He should get his king to safety. And instead of doing that, he helped black attack. He's like, you want to attack me? Go ahead. Not a good idea playing Morphy. He took that pawn. That's not a good move because he's helping Morphy develop his knight. So I think that's the losing move. Morphy took with the knight. Now Morphy wants to put his knight on d4. And the guy was like, wow, you're pinning me. That's not very nice. He played king f1. Now he's not being pinned, but he can never castle. Okay, and now Morphy made a brilliant move in this position. He sacrificed. The reason he sacrificed is he wanted to keep pinning. So instead of taking with the bishop, he took with the rook. And the reason is, after knight takes, that knight is pinned. He's got the pin going, so he played knight d4. You can't take that knight because you lose your queen. But you can't defend your knight either. So you're in a lot of trouble here. You got all these pieces attacking your knight, and more pieces are coming. And you can't defend the knight, so white's losing. If it was black's turn to move, black would win the queen. Bishop takes check. So you can see early in the game, Morphy castled, and his opponent never castled. Now he's getting punished. Well, he didn't want to lose his queen, so he played queen b1. Check. Check. Man, Morphy checks a lot. King here. Now, Morphy did something called a clearance sacrifice. He wanted to make a move, but you can't capture your own piece. You got to get your piece out of the way. If you could capture your own piece, which you can't, black would play queen takes the knight, and that would be checkmate soon. If that was a white knight, that would be a great move. If only Morphy's knight wasn't here, then he could play his queen to d4. So he sacrificed his knight with check. White has to take it. Check again. Check again. Check again. And obviously this king isn't very safe. Once again, you want to take your own piece. Queen takes checkmate, but you're not allowed to. You got to move that knight somewhere so you can play queen g4 mate. He played knight h6. Now he's threatening queen g4 mate. Well, you can't get mated. You have to defend g4. So he played a very long move. Queen g1. Knight f5 check. The king is coming for a walk. King g5. Now, black has checkmate in one move. Can you find it? There's only one move that's checkmate. There's one thing black can do. And the answer, hopefully you found it, queen h5 mate. And the reason that's the only mate and these pawn moves aren't mate is because the knight is attacked. So if you check with a pawn, then the king can take the knight. Probably you'd still win because the king's walking around, but mate in one's better. So white moves his king up the board and keeps his other pieces on the first rank, not castling, moving his king too much. Morphy sacrificed material, attacked his opponent's king, and as usual, was successful. Another great game by Paul Morphy, my favorite player. And I hope you learned something from these videos. You really should castle and not walk your king up the board. Thanks, Paul Morphy. This is Grandmaster Ben Finegold for Kid Chess. Bye, everybody.